Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show. I'm here today with Niall Daly, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks very much for having me, Tim.
Absolutely. So I wanted to have you on because you're just a kind of, I want to say, just normal person using the iPad and go about life. You're not a developer. You're not someone trying to create something in that capacity. Can you kind of just first off tell me a little bit about what your day-to-day life is like?
I work as a business coach, mentor, and also as a part-time CFO for hire for small, high-growth businesses. And also my wife and I run interior design business. So we run 3 retail outlets in the southeast of England. So my days are quite varied depending on the hat that I'm wearing. But probably since June 2016, I've been pretty well iPad only, partly because of the mobility aspect of it, being able to move around very easily between locations, but also because I just find it a lot easier to get things done. I use a iPad Pro 1st Gen 12.9 because I like the large screen estate. I know it's slightly bigger, and people do give you odd looks on the train when you pull out the big screen. But for me, it's the big screen makes such a difference. With the smart keyboard as well, it gives me the best of both worlds. I never really enjoyed lugging even an iPad Air around. I just felt it slightly clunky, and that's why I've sort of stayed with iOS. And I think with the ecosystem and with the phone as well, it just means you do really have everything everywhere. So the iPad really is my organization tool. I'm a big OmniFocus user, so that gets everything goes into OmniFocus. It's the base for most of my communications, be it through Skype, through email, through instant messaging. It's a scratch pad, so the ideas that I have, or when I'm working with clients, so I'll often use the iPad, which again is a good reason to have the bigger screen. We'll sit around with the iPad and draw and share with the pencil and sketch things out, which I find really helpful. And I use it then for presentations, for writing, for project planning, pretty well everything.
Okay. What application do you use for drawing with your clients?
The one I use most is Paper by 53 when we're doing quick and dirty things. Again, because it's very simple, not complicated, and the auto shape correction is great because it just means that it doesn't look quite as messy as it would if you were just messing around. If I'm doing work where I'm projecting, I use an app called the Work Visual app by a guy called Holger Niels Pohl from Germany, which is great for projecting on a screen because it hides all the sort of gubbins on the screen, and everybody sees just what you're writing. So if you're going in and out and undoing, people don't see that. They just see what you're drawing. So for a more formal presentation, that's what I tend to do.
What's that app called again?
It's called the Work Visual app.
Work Visual, okay.
Yeah, which is a good tool. I recently downloaded Linear, which was following actually one of your episodes where you interviewed the guys from Linear. So I've been using that as well recently, which is a very, very nice app, I have to say.
Oh, wonderful. Something you mentioned is Skype, which we're using right now. Do you do much video conferencing in your professional life?
Yeah, I do. I work on a program for University of Oxford, which is backed by Goldman Sachs. And what that does is we work with high growth businesses, but it's a national UK program. So my mentees can be anywhere in the UK. And I use a combination of Skype and Google Hangouts. So if I'm in my home office, I will often use it on the Mac. But if I'm out and about, I will use it on the iPad.
One of the most frustrating limitations with iOS is, I understand it from a privacy angle, but the camera will many times shut off if you're even just in split view mode or even slide over, I think. Is that right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So the ability to have use a document or any sort of reference whilst you're on the call makes the call a little bit flaky, and therefore if it is a video call, you lose that interaction a little bit. It's annoying because you really want to be able to do everything on one device, and having a split screen with a document reference and your even mini portraits would be great. So I'm hopeful one day.
Yeah, it is a bit annoying. I am using iPads to do webinars for my day job,
Yeah.
and you can add the screen share. So I'm able to, exit the webinar app and start screen sharing. But once you leave the app, of course, you lose your video feed. So it would be nice if, one day that got enabled and Apple would have to make it super clear. This camera is active. They would need to have a lot of dialogue because that's one of people's biggest fears. You see these people taping up their laptop cameras.
One day.
One day. Yes, one day. So prior to iOS, you said 2016 is when you kind of made the jump to iPad. What kind of tasks were you using, I presume, a Mac up until then? Has what you used a computer for changed? You mentioned drawing as something new you're doing.
That was something that would be done, on a piece of paper, A3 piece of paper. So that's something that I can now do digitally, which means that I can capture the things digitally, which is a good record. But more importantly, what I'm seeing on some of the drawing apps, Procreate and Adobe Draw, is the ability to capture what you draw as a video. So once you've created the drawing, you can then go back, take a time-lapse movie of that drawing and take that into iMovie and sort of edit it, and you then got a sort of video record of what you and other people were involved in doing, and that I think is a great use of the iPad. I did have contact with the Linear guys, and I think they may be bringing that functionality to Linear in the near future. So that's one thing that's been a big positive. A lot of the other things, I'm a big mind mapper. Always have been from the early days, and one app that's been on my iPad from my first generation iPad is iThoughts HD. That is such a good app to use on the iPad because you've got the ability to touch the screen. Well, as I was using it on the Mac, it just didn't feel the same. I didn't enjoy it as much as I do on the iPad. And having, again, the 12.9-inch screen is a great canvas to be able to sort of touch and move nodes around and structure your thinking.
Yeah, for sure. As you mentioned, the going back in time for drawing, my mind just immediately went to that being a movie plot one day where there's some hidden message in a recording of a drawing that someone finds.
You never know.
You never know, yeah. So you mentioned you still use a Mac at your home office, is that right?
Very occasionally. The business I work for, we have a payroll package, and that only works on the Mac. It's a web app, but there is just some aspects of it. There must be some scripting where you cannot, even in a desktop mode on the iPad, even with iCab as a browser replacement, you can't complete some of the jobs. So I'm stuck with a couple of things that I have to use a Mac for. But
yeah, that's one of the biggest frustrations with iOS is the browser. Some websites like HubSpot, for example, it's just atrociously made for touch, and it is. Yeah. So
absolutely.
One day that just needs to end. Squarespace, even. I tried building a website in Squarespace, and no, absolutely not. It's not it's one day.
I think that would be my biggest gripe is that level of web parity. You'd think that, particularly in this day and age where the web is such a medium for distributing information, but also for interacting with data, that you get that level of parity. And I think if I wanted one thing, it would be that, because that would free the use of the tablet for me personally completely.
Yeah, I understand doing some rejiggering of your site to make it more touch friendly, but most of the time it's just not usable in the way they do it, or not most of the time, but there's some good examples of that. One thing I'd recommend: have you tried Jump Desktop as a way to?
No, I haven't.
So this application, I think I've talked about it a little bit before on the show. It lets you remote into your Mac, and setup's really simple, but it supports a Bluetooth mouse that you can hook up to your iPad, so you're using your smart keyboard and a mouse, and it feels like you're using your Mac kind of natively. You can copy and paste between iOS and Mac, and that's how I deal with needing to access Mac stuff during my day job. My Mac's just in a closet, and I just open it up, it does split view, and yeah, it's a really good solution for that.
Great. Well, I'm going to make a note of that because that would make life so much easier.
For the Mac apps, do you use iCloud? Like, what's your storage mechanism?
I have all of them, and it's basically driven by where I am and who I'm going to be working. My base is Dropbox, so most of my storage is Dropbox based, but I've got some clients who, when I'm in their Wi-Fi area, Dropbox is blocked. So you have to use OneDrive because they're generally Microsoft houses. And I'll use iCloud, particularly where apps natively support it. So, where it's used for things like drafts and Ulysses, and I use MindNode. I'll use the iCloud. But I found with iOS 11 and the whole files infrastructure, a little flaky around the edges, but it means in some respects it doesn't really matter where the data is. It's there, and you can use it on your iPad. And actually, if you are going to need to move things around, moving things between your cloud providers is relatively straightforward. The iPad is just a sort of window on any cloud service that I happen to want to use.
Yeah, and there's drag and drop now in the Dropbox native app, which is good.
Absolutely. It makes a big difference.
Was Dropbox something that you used before iCloud became as beefy as it is? Is this a legacy thing that you're using Dropbox, or are there some aspects of it? Okay.
Never used Dropbox until I got the first gen iPad, and then it's been with me ever since. And I think iCloud I've just gradually started to use. I haven't used it as much. I haven't given a sort of a full run like David Sparks has done and gone over and gone whole hog in.
I made the switch as well once Files app came out, because it's just to me it's just it's not buggy, right? There's some bugs with Dropbox integration, and it feels better, just. And the pricing, $10 a month, 2 terabytes. It's amazing. Their pricing, Apple, is actually better for the high end of storage. The low end, not as much, I think. But yeah,
I agree. I think that's one thing. Frankly, I think they change. I think getting people on board with a slightly better package at the lower end would be the right thing.
More storage for every device you buy would be a nice incentive too.
Yeah, that would be on the wish list.
You mentioned Ulysses. Is that the main writing tool you use?
If I'm doing client reports, it tends to be, if it's going to be a long form report with various headings and breaks and what have you. But short notes, I tend to use Bear. But my origination is either iThoughts. So I will often sketch out a project with a client, and I'll do it as a mind map. And that will form maybe the basis then for work that's going to come out. So it'll be the basis for documents and project plans. So I will take the output in Markdown, because iThought supports Markdown. And whilst I'm not a geek or a developer, I found that Markdown has been a great help, because it's meant I can produce something that can be used in a multiple different locations. And with iThoughts, I can put a document in Markdown in the mind map, export it to Ulysses, and it'd be all ready then for any fine tuning or presentation layers. But at the same time, the same outline, I can export that to a project planning app that I use called Quick Plan Pro, which means that I use one set of data in 2 different locations. And then from Quick Plan Pro, I can then do the project planning bit that you need to do to sort of get dependencies and timelines and what have you. And then that can produce an MS project output, or it can produce an Excel output. So if I'm working with a client that's got a good, robust program office, they want to see things in MS Project. If it's a small team, frankly, they just want to see something highly visual, and it produces a very nice Excel output, all from the original iThoughts mind map. To me, that interaction between apps on iOS is a huge advantage of the operating system. It's something I've always found very difficult to do on a Mac environment or in a Windows environment. So the share sheet stuff is great, and the ability to get data through different apps, and those are professional apps, and I don't mind paying for those, because they support my work, and I think that's very valuable.
Yeah, one of the things I just love is drag and drop. I'm able to not even export stuff out of Pixelmator. I'm able to just tap and hold the drag and directly upload that into WordPress without even saving it to my desktop first, or iCloud Drive first. It's everything is talks really well together.
And I think that the iOS 11 stuff, I think, has been great. I think drag and drop is a game changer in that respect. It works really well with the touch environment. I don't enjoy using a mouse. I just enjoy that sort of interaction with the with the screen.
Yeah. Something else I really appreciated this week is I had a lot of projects where I needed to just change my screen to be vertical. And, I'm reading something
Yeah.
that I wouldn't be using the size of the screen. And iOS has that flexibility of your aspect ratio in that way.
Absolutely. No, again, I think it's a very flexible toolkit.
So you mentioned enjoying touch more than like the mouse. What other aspects of iOS are big improvements to you over, say, the Mac?
I like using the pencil for navigation. I didn't think I would. I thought it would be a bit odd, but I've actually found it great, particularly in Office, because obviously I still work in areas where Microsoft is what you have to use. The navigation with the pencil is terrific. The thing that I feel a bit disgruntled about is that you can't now do that in the iWork suite because it defaults to being a drawing tool, and I've not found any way of switching that off.
Yeah, for apps that enable that, that's what it is.
The ability to be efficient. I've found that tools like Workflow and Drafts, which have enabled other people far brighter and better than me to create the workflows and the sort of actions for things like drafts, and being a very generous community, have meant that you can go in and you can almost find somebody has had the same problem as you're trying to solve. And sometimes you can use it out of the box as they've done it, or with a little tweaking, you can make it work for you. And to me, that is great. And maybe you can do that on the desktop environments. I don't know. I don't know where I saw this from. A guy did a YouTube video creating a workflow to create an expenses report. So I tailored that, which means that now I can just run that workflow every day when I'm doing my expenses, key them in. It goes through and asks you the questions, then puts everything into a CSV file, which means at the end of the month, I just go to the CSV file, take the expenses off there, and my job is done. It's great. And I think Federico Vitici did one where he almost like created a reading list. So capturing any article that was online and using the share sheet workflow action would create a link to Bear, put the article in Bear, and then take the link to the Bear article and put that into, he was using it into Todoist, but I amended it to use OmniFocus. So I now can build a reading list that goes into OmniFocus, has the context and project reading. The link goes back to a Bear article, and the Bear article then has a link back to the original web article. So it's all linked using the URL schemes, which, again, I sort of conceptually understand it. I don't think I could do it, but by finding somebody who has solved as near to the problem that you've got, it's great to be able to save time and just find an article and know that it's going to end up where you want to see it later.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love Workflow. I use it to download YouTube videos and send those to Ferrate if I want to work with that audio in some way. Plugged into our HubSpot API to do social networks and scheduling from Workflow, which is phenomenal. And yeah, all sorts of just if I'm working with standard text stuff, so like HTML, I've got our HTML signature. I've got a workflow for our work where if we have a new employee, I can just have them put in the variables and it'll spit out a pretty HTML signature for them. Like it's great. Yeah.
That's some really cool ideas, and I think you're only limited by the amount. Well, for me, it's limited by the imagination of other people, but you can find so many different things, and some of them are interesting but not very useful. But so many of them are just incredibly useful.
Good to see it's still getting some supports from Apple. They're pushing out some updates. How has the iPad helped you improve your speed and efficiency in just general computing tasks from where you're using the Mac before? What slowed you down on the Mac versus what's faster? We mentioned Workflow probably being one of those things that's faster for you.
Both from the Windows environment and the Mac, I just found that getting around the screen was cumbersome. And I find the touch interface, the gestures, which through touch or through keyboard shortcuts, just work. I think it's simple things. Like I know you can use keyboard shortcuts on a Mac. I never really got into it, but just being able to hold a single key on the smart keyboard and get them popping up on the screen, I've just found that I've adapted to it much more naturally than on the Mac. And I think things like the the ability to just focus on a single app. You are in control of your notifications. You don't have to have anything on. You can just focus on your single task. If you're doing split screen, for me, it's generally because I'm doing a single task. I'm not multitasking on the screen. I'm generally using two applications to do something that is an end result. And I find that it's the focus on the work. I can focus on what it is that I'm doing rather than the tool, if that makes sense. So if I'm doing a document, I can be focused on the document. I don't have to worry too much about formatting. I don't have to worry about getting around the screen. I don't have to worry about the system freezing or locking up, which for me was a perennial issue in my days with Windows.
Yeah.
If you didn't have auto save on, you were doomed because you knew your document would die at some point.
So what's in your dock?
There is Safari, Apple Mail, and the reason I have Apple Mail is that I find for email management, I have Apple Mail up joined with OmniFocus, and I will go through, and any emails that need actioned will be dragged across to maintain the link. And that to me is a good enough reason to stick with Apple Mail, despite its odd foibles.
Has that been reliable for you? Have you ever had mail links broken? I've occasionally had that where the mail link didn't work.
I've had a couple which have just gone back to a screen and then nothing linked. And I would say probably 9 times out of 10 it's okay, and then you'll get the odd one that's gone.
Yeah, okay. What other apps in your dock?
So the other one there is an app called Close, which is my CRM. This has been a great app for me because, again, managing multiple clients and multiple projects means that everything can come into one place. It's a subscription app, but my philosophy is I'm prepared to pay a sensible subscription fee for a professional app.
Yeah, you're running a business, and
because it's how I make my money.
Yeah,
being able to keep in contact with people. It prompts you. It's got little bits of AI built in. It has great integration with Dropbox. So if you've got a client folder with client file names, when you look at the client view, you'll have all your files there. I use Evernote for some reference materials. So again, if your note contains the client name or the person name, when you go to those records, all that data's there. So it's a great app for me for bringing things together. I've got the calendar app straight out of the box. It works for me. I don't need any of the other elements. I've got OmniFocus, the Files app, Messages, and Gladys.
Oh, so that is your drag and drop repository, Gladys.
Yeah, that's my shelf app.
Yeah, and how do you use it? What's your standard uses of that?
Generally, it's for collecting stuff that I'm going to use somewhere else. So sometimes if I know I'm going to have to put images into a document and client logos that are going to go in, I'll put them into Gladys, and then I will just drag and drop them into the document when I'm ready. If I'm collecting attachments that will go into an email at a later date, I will sometimes collect them, put them into Gladys, and then when I'm ready to do the email, I will just drag and drop them out. So I think it sounds like a bit long-winded, but I found it to be very useful as a sort of interim collection. I don't store anything in there for any period of time. It is very transitory by its nature. Then I have 4 folders in the
so you do use folders in the dock. I was wondering about that because I have no folders in my dock. My home screen's littered with them, but yeah.
At the moment it's working fine. So I've got one that is what I call Office tools. So it has Microsoft Office, it has Google, it has iWork. I've got another one that has the drawing tools. I have another one that has mind mapping tools, and I have another one that has writing tools. So again, they're there for me to just sort of swipe up and select and move around. It's been in there for a couple of months, and so far it's working. I'll see how I get on.
Is there anything about working on the iPad that you don't like and wish they can improve in future OS or hardware revisions?
Yeah, I think the main one we spoke briefly about before was the parity with web apps. And I think that parity would be great if it extended into other areas. I mean, I do occasional work with clients with Excel, and there are sometimes you do some modeling work where the formulas and stuff will not work on the iPad. So it would be nice to have some fuller parity on some of the more powerful functions in the Office suite, but particularly Excel for me, because that's part of my job. And I think, again, in some of the communication tools, the ability to do things fully on the iPad, video and recording, so things that would be media related, which would cut the cord completely, I think would be great. Generally, I actually enjoy working on the iPad, and I don't get that frustrated. So I think I have a reasonable wish list, and it will be good to see if that ever comes true.
Yeah. Using the iPad outside of work, do you use, I'm not sure, like Netflix and other like entertainment stuff? Like, what do you use it for outside of work?
Absolutely. Good use on YouTube.
Yeah, what do you use for YouTube? Because sometimes YouTube can be frustrating on iOS.
To be honest, I've sat with the bog standard YouTube app, and I found it okay.
Okay.
It does what it needs to do. I have it on the Elevation Lab stand, so it sits there at a reasonable angle. I can watch it. I watch Netflix. We have Sky cable, so Sky Go I can download or watch TV. And again, with the 12.9 inch screen, it's great. So you get a reasonable picture. I will use the Sketch apps for some rest. I mean, I'm no artist, I hasten to add, but it's a bit of chilling out.
Yeah. Have you ever gone to the coloring book apps?
I haven't. No. The adult coloring thing, I think I let that pass me by. I never got into it.
Anything else you'd like to share about iOS or anything else?
I think the big thing for me is that where I see the work going next with the iPad supporting is that being able to do a lot of multimedia stuff. So, traditionally, my work involves giving to people documents, but more and more, I'm finding that what I'm doing is recording video or recording sketches and producing a tool for them that's got video, it's got sound, it's got images, and being able to do that on the iPad has been great. And I found tools like LumaFusion, which I think I heard from Chris Lawley.
Yeah, I had Terry on from LumaFusion. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've heard that one.
I learned a lot from that episode, and
it's a shame they don't get more publicity. I see these app store stories quite frequently about video editing, and more often than not they don't include it. It feels like a crime to me that you're leaving off the best apps. I don't know. It feels like a little iMovie pettiness. Yeah.
I completely agree. And I think that, to me, being able to do that in an environment like iOS with the iPad means that something can be done very, very quickly, and it adds value because people will engage with it much more than they will with a traditional document. And you can get over client situations and scenarios. So you can be having a coaching conversation with a client on a Skype call. You can draw the conversation. It can then be edited to get rid of any errors, and you can put in some other documents and images, and you can give that to a client as an output from a coaching session, which to me is far more powerful than trying to do traditional meeting notes.
Yeah. Because
they've got the conversation, they've got a video, they can go backwards and forwards, and then you can leave them with the actions as part of the package. And to me, that's where I'm taking it. And I could not have seen myself do that without having the tools built into a device like the iPad working in iOS.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you have any questions about audio editing, Ferrite is great, and you can ask me about that if you run into stuff, because I use that app quite a bit.
It has been downloaded. I have not given any anger yet, so you may well find me reaching out, because the other thing I think is that people like yourself, community is very inspiring and very generous. I think your podcast is great. I've listened to a number of episodes more than once. I pick things up every time. People like Jeff Perry and Chris Lawley and Federico Viticci, I think are great models of what you can do to push the boundaries of a tool that, previously people thought was just a consumption device.
That's a good place to leave it, I think.
That's great.
Where can people find you on the interwebs? If you'd like to plug any places, please do.
Yeah, on the Twitter, I'm Niall_CSpace, and you'll generally find me hanging around there on a fairly regular basis. If people want to reach out and find out any information or how I use any iOS, via Twitter is probably the best place. I will be there several times a day.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again for your time today. It's been fantastic talking with you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Thanks very much for inviting me. It's been great.
That is the show for today. Thank you for listening, and I'd really appreciate it if you could head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. It would mean quite a bit to me and help others discover the show. If you want to send feedback, you can send that to iPadProsPodcast@gmail.com. You can find the show notes over at iPadPros.net. And thanks again for listening. We'll be back in 2 weeks for another episode of iPad Pros.